Okay, we'll to start now a share, continue the halachas of Ceirovin. What we stopped the last share was 2 weeks ago, but we'll try to catch up this week. We go through certain topics in סימן Shein, which are relevant lemaisa, some of them more than others. I'm not going to go through the whole סימן. Go through certain points which are relevant, and there's an interesting letter from the Rebbe regarding one of the topics that's discussed in this סימן. In Siv Beis, Saiv Alter Rebbe, Saiv Shulchan Aruch, it discusses somebody who has a lot of houses, he owns a property which has a bunch of houses in it, and he rents them out to people, he lends them out to people. And the Shulchan Aruch right away starts when it's not oiser. The Alter Rebbe gives you a small introduction when they are oiser, when there's certain people that have, if you have one owner and he has 6 houses, and some of those houses are rented out to other people, when are those people oiser on the bahלכות? So the definition of oiser is, as you already know, that means that one person cannot carry, each of them cannot carry from their house to the other person's house or to the chotzer. And not only that, they're oiser on the baal bayis himself also, that he also can't carry from his house to the chotzer, from the chotzer to his house, from his house to other people's houses. Right, so the Alter Rebbe begins by saying the first, if it's rented out to somebody, or if it's lent out to somebody in a way that you cannot get rid of him during the time frame. Now this is something which Alter Rebbe is going to mention 3 times in the סימן. It's very important to remember this, because there are different definitions of deciding when a person is oiser on somebody else and when a person is not oiser. And the fact that Alter Rebbe puts it here and again in Seif Hey twice, this definition that it depends on whether you could get rid of him during the time frame or not, is an important condition, which we'll soon see. It boils into a discussion between the Rishonim and also the Achreinim. What are the conditions on this matter? Well, here Alter Rebbe puts it: if you rent it to somebody, or if you lend it, if you shilam, if you let a person use it for a certain amount of time and you can't get rid of him during that time, then it's considered like it's their house, the person who rented it, or the person who has it to use it without being able to get rid of him, and they're oiser on each other until they do a Eruv. Right? The same thing again is mentioned in the end of Seif Hey. It's talking about a melamed or talmidim which live in the house, and that if the rooms which are kanui to them, or are rented to them, or are mushal, they're lent to them in a way that they cannot be removed during the time. Which means if it's rented to them, you don't have to say that they can't be removed during the time, because that is the halach. If you rent to somebody for a certain amount of time, then you can't get rid of them during the time. But if it's lent to somebody, then it has to be clear that it's for a specific period of time and you can't get rid of them. In such a scenario, then they make it usher on him. And over there, the Alter Rebbe adds, even if they share the same kitchen and they share the same oven, etc., which we're going to get to later. And the Alter Rebbe explains it. His reasoning why the Alter Rebbe takes this position is explained in the Ha'ara, in the footnote, both over here and over there. Sometimes in the footnotes you'll see where it's a different font. It's from the Alter Rebbe, and a whole explanation both here and there. Then the Alter Rebbe, we're going to get to it later. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues over here that if the baal bayis has in each of these rooms something which cannot be removed on Shabbos because it is usher to remove it, that means not because of any other reason, but something which is muktzah in such a way that there is no way you could remove it on Shabbos, that means that he still has tfisas yad, he still has some connection, some ownership to this location, some rights to this room. he has a tfisas yad. That's also the concept of here. If he has a tfisas yad in that room, and it's as if the owner still lives in each one of those rooms of those houses, and if he lives in each one of those rooms of those houses, that means that each and every person who's living there are considered like they are his guests and not independent owners, and therefore there's no problem, nobody's oyster on anybody, these people are not oyster on the Baal Bayis, and everybody could carry wherever they want within this area. However, if he could remove it for a specific reason on Shabbos, that means even though if it's muktzah, but it's something which could be removed based on Shabbos in a specific way, it's no isser, it's no longer considered tfisas yad. Why? Because he could remove it when he wants it from there. So the mere fact that it's just staying there doesn't mean that he is that he has a tfisas yad in the room. He's not using the room. The fact is, it's there. It's not something permanent over there. Now, just a interesting thing to point out. This is some people might make this mistake. If something is there just because I have something which belongs to me, and it might be muktzah, and I rent out an apartment, doesn't mean I have a tfisas yad in the apartment. If I rent a washing machine is muktzah on Shabbos. And if we'll get to washing machine mitzvah, its weight is a separate discussion. But if I rent it to you with the room, that becomes yours like everything else. It's not anymore the Baal Bayis' thing. Just like the house I rent to you, and it becomes yours for the time of rental, the Alter Rebbe is later going to define that tzchirus liyoyim is a memkar. Same thing is, if I rent to you, anything which is in the apartment, which is part of the rental, is also considered like it's yours for the period of time that it was rented to you. It doesn't remain mine that I could afterward, that you could use it as a heter for tiltul. Now, what happens if there's something, the yesh oimrim, that if it's something which is heavy, it's also considered tfisas yad, even though halachically you could take it out on Shabbos. And the Alter Rebbe says, yesh lahachmir. It concludes the yesh lahachmir. That basically means that that anything which is mutter betiltul, even if it's heavy, it still is oyser. And this is based on a kasha of the Magen Avraham, because this is Shulchan Aruch says this. And the Magen Avraham asks the question: how could you make a definition of the Alter Rebbe mentions this in the Magen Avraham in the footnotes of this, based on the Magen Avraham, that how could you make a definition that something which is heavy is going to change the status when something which is heavy is something which is dependent on the person. It's heavy for one person, it's not heavy for somebody else. Happens to be the two footnotes before that, Alter Rebbe says Sorechiyun Godel on the kasha of the Magen Avraham, but still, the Ma'aseh Alter Rebbe paskins yesh lahachmir. Now, let's just take a step for a second to see the people that do follow this because of weight. How do you define it? So the Aruch HaShulchan has an interesting definition. The Aruch HaShulchan says that it's something which is permanently there, not screwed into the wall, but something which is there the whole time, even if it's not muktzah, is the same category as something which is muktzah or something which is heavy. It's something which is not made to be moved. A simple example would be if you have a night table, is something which is essentially not really muktzah because it could be used on Shabbos. It is used on Shabbos, and you could pick it up. It's not heavy, and at least the smaller ones, not heavy. But it's made to be in a place. It's made to be there the whole time. If it's made to be there the whole time, it's not a problem. The Das Torah, which is a Marsham, he explains that it means that something heavy. The definition is that you need two people to pick it up, or at least you have to use both hands to carry it. However, both of these don't solve the problem, the kasha of the Magen Avraham, because the Magen Avraham's kasha is that you can't make a rule based on something which depends on people. The fact that it's heavy for you doesn't mean it's going to be heavy for me.
Mashal says it's before you need two hands or two people?
Yeah. That definition of heavy says either or. He doesn't give a clear definition. Huh?
Heavy is like mentally heavy? Meaning, what's the
No.
connection between the two?
What?
How do you define heavy as a placement issue?
Who? The Marsham doesn't define placement. The Aruch HaShulchan doesn't define that as heavy. The Aruch HaShulchan defines that as something which makes it tfisas yad, that remains there. Something that the Aruch HaShulchan looks at something which is not made to be removed. Means let's rephrase it. What does it mean that you have tfisas yad? It means I have something in your room which is not made to be, which I will not remove on Shabbos. So the first reason is I will not remove it because it's muktzah, right? That's what Alter Rebbe paskins. The second reason that the Shulchan Aruch brings something which is heavy. I'm not going to remove it because it's much heavy to remove. The Aruch HaShulchan introduces a new concept. He says it's because something which is made to be there permanently is not going to be removed. So it also qualifies for tfisas yad. No, that's something. But the Marsham, when he says that the heavy means two hands or two people,
That's a big difference.
he doesn't give a specific. He says either.
That are heavy.
He doesn't. He gives two explanations. Doesn't tell you. But he doesn't pass it. Downstairs is a beer on the Shulchan Aruch. The Marsham. The way he just explains. Either it could mean that or it could mean that. It gives two possible explanations to it. What's interesting is the Marsham over there adds something else. That if the owner is a Mechal Shabbos that doesn't care about muktzah, so this doesn't help you anymore. Because the mere fact that it's muktzah doesn't mean that this guy is not going to walk in and take it out on Shabbos. It's Mechal Shabbos. So that doesn't solve your problem of having a tfisas yad in the room. Anyway, so the first point that we know from here is that before we have tfisas, that the first thing to be oyster on somebody else, the person has to be in such a way that that the renters or the ones that are staying in that room the renter has a time frame that he cannot get kicked out of there during the time, or that it was lent to him with a time frame that he can't get kicked out during the time. Then the Alter Rebbe continues in Sif Gimel that tfisas yad is only when, and this is he says it's the Yashayman, but this is the Ramon, that's how we paskin, that it only helps when there's nobody else in the Chotzer which needs to do a Erev. That means I own 6 houses in the Chotzer and there's no other houses in the Chotzer. But if I own 6 houses in the Chotzer and somebody else owns 1 house in the Chotzer, so the fact that I have 6 houses in the Chotzer, I still have to make it, that guy still has to make an Erev, he's still oyster on me, he's not part of my 6 houses. And in such a case, you do have to make an Erev unless the Erev is in the house of the Balabais, because that way, once in the house of this Balabais of the 6 houses, then it covers everybody else. Because once it's in the house of somebody, where the Erev, where the house where the Erev is, doesn't need its own independent Erev. So therefore, if it's not like that, if it's in somebody else's house, or it's in one of the houses which is rented out, and even if it has tfisas yad, then everybody needs a Erev. And Sif Hey, the Alter Rebbe goes into more explanation when there is a Yisur. Even though the Alter Rebbe started in Sif Beis, mentions it in short, one condition, and Sif Beis is mainly what is mutter, Sif Beis, Sif Gimel, Sif Daled. In Sif Hey, the Alter Rebbe goes into explaining when it is Yisur. The first example that the Alter Rebbe brings is, 5 groups of people, they rented a big hall, and they put up temporary walls to separate them, so each one has their own room. First condition is that the walls go up all the way to that they're divided into specific rooms. So we're going to see how the division works. It's temporary divisions, but it's still something. Second of all, each room has direct access to the Chotzer. Doesn't mean that each room opens up straight to the Chotzer. It means that all the rooms open up to a hallway which lead to the Chotzer. Now, sometimes you have, if you're talking about places which are built like motels, they all open up directly into the Chotzer. But even if not, if each of these rooms are made in such a way that it opens up, that means that these partitions were put up in such a way that each one has access to the hallway and from there to the Chotzer, and nobody has to walk through somebody else's room to get outside. And the mechitzas, these temporary mechitzas, make it all the way up to the ceiling of the room, or at least within 3 tfachim from it, which is lavud. Then each one of these is considered a shuz b'fnei atzma, even though it is a temporary division, and they have to make an erev between themselves. to be able to carry from one room to another, to be able to carry outside, to be able to carry from outside inside. Right? Again, this only applies when they have when this traklin, this big hole, is in a chatzar which has other people in the chatzar. But and therefore, there anyways has to be an Eruv made. So the question is, do these people have to make an Eruv between themselves to them or not? But if there isn't any, but if the Eruv was put in the hallway of this main room of the 5, it's not Oyser. Why? Because each person has his own independent, because the Eruv is in the room and is poiter everybody else. But if each one rents his own room in this place, his permanent rooms, or they made permanent separations between them, that means they didn't just put up sheets with sticks or they put up something which is a temporary partition, rather it's something which was semi-permanent, more than just a sheet, it's not mechitza sarai, then they need a Eruv as long as each person has access to the chatzar. And if not everybody has access to the chatzar, then only the people who are inside need to make an Eruv between themselves, because the people that are in the rooms that everybody crosses through might be considered like a base shar, and it's not a issue. But the Alter Rebbe continues, this only applies when they're all equal. But what happens if a balabas has students, which is what I mentioned before, or a melamed in his house? So then, even though the melamed has his own room, or the students have their own room, and each room is open to the chatzar, and each room is open maybe even to the shusarabim, and each person eats and sleeps in his own room, which is also an important point to remember, because soon we're going to see that it boils down to where a person eats. Each of them eats and sleeps in their own bedroom, but they are there to live there. Then you don't have to make an Eruv, and they're not oyser on the balabayis, even if the balabayis does not have a tfisas yad in any of these rooms. Why? Because he did not lend the rooms to them for the purpose of them being oyser on him. And Alter Rebbe adds that lesalko he could get rid of them whenever he wants. Again, over here, the Alter Rebbe again brings it out. This is the only place in Alter Rebbe where it's written in the Pnim and not in footnotes. It's not in parentheses, not in Segrayim. That over here, because he could get rid of them whenever he wants, the Melamed or the Talmidim, so therefore they're not oyser on him, and he did not have in mind that they should be oyser on him, and therefore even though they're eating in their own rooms, they're still not oyser on him and not considered their own independent owners. But obviously if the rooms are rented to them or connected to them, or they're lent to them in such a way that he cannot get rid of them during a specific time, then you can no longer say, I didn't lend it to you, that you should be oyser it on me, and therefore they do become oyser. They are oyser one another unless there is a tfisas yad. And Alter Rebbe then adds, even if they all share the same kitchen and they cook in the same place. Why? Because since they eat in their own rooms, and they have this, since they eat in their own rooms, so the fact that they share the same kitchen is not enough to do it. So we introduced four concepts which could make a difference in a room, which is, first of all, can't get rid of them during the time. Second of all, do you eat in your own room or not? Sharing kitchens is not always enough. And the concept of tfisas yad, which depends on what thing of tfisas yad there is over there. And the Alter Rebbe over here tells you, over here in the footnote, he explains why the Alter Rebbe points out to you why he paskins according to this idea that it depends on יכול לסלקו or not. He says it's based on the Beis Yosef, it's based on the understanding of Tosfos, and the fact that the Ma'arik is mekel, even even in a place where eino yachil lסלקו, the Alter Rebbe says, is because the Marik follows a different opinion. He holds that the ikar reason for the heter of Talmidim and the Melamed is based on the fact that they use the same kitchen. Not because of the fact that they have the same, not because of bמשאיל לסלקו, that he could get rid of them or not. And when the Alter Rebbe, when the Marik is matir in the soicher, he's only talking about which does not have access to the kitchen. It's because of tfisas yad. So according to the Marik, it's either because of tfisas yad or because of shared usage of the kitchen. But he does not consider the idea of getting rid of the person. But the Alter Rebbe does not go. But the Alter Rebbe explains that the mashma from Tosfos, and it's clearly brought in the bמשאיל that in the mechaber in the bמשאיל that it boils down to יכול לסלקו, if you could get rid of them or not. And if you can't get rid of them, then even if they use the same oven and use the same kitchen, that does not create enough of a shared ownership to be able to claim that you do not need an eruv chatzeres, that you do not need the eruv between the people, and there are oyser on one another. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch, you have the Taz, and you have the Taz over there. He says that the main reason is because shared usage of the oven, but he says, but the bמשאיל adds about the eino yachil lסלקו. And if you look at the Magen Avraham, he says that it boils down to sachur ikanu lehem. The Magen Avraham does not discuss whether bמשאיל לסלקו or not, but the idea that you could get rid of them, that depends on whether you could get rid of them or not, that is how the Alter Rebbe looks at it based on the understanding of the bמשאיל. Which means if you look at it based on the shitta of the Alter Rebbe, when it's a person is a soicher, or it's kanu to him, or he's a shayel, but you can't get rid of him during the time, it makes no difference what he uses, if he uses the kitchen or not, but as long as there's no tfisas yad, and the person eats in his own room, his own food, then he is oyser on the other one. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah and Bir Halacha on the end of Sif Gimel, he also understood the Alter Rebbe in such a way, and he explains that that's how the Bir Agra also seems to imply the same understanding as Alter Rebbe, and the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah is v'hu mamish keshitas harashba v'aritva, that as opposed to the other shittas, it's a very gishmak Bir Halacha if you want to go through it. In the Mishnah Berurah, he goes through all the different shittas in this topic, and he explains the Alter Rebbe's shitta in short, but it's a long Bir Halacha, which is interesting to read. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues in Seif Vav with an important introduction that the ikar place of a person's residence is the place where he eats, not the place where he sleeps. And whoever learned in Hilchis much earlier in Hilchis Shabbos and Siman Reish Samach Gimel, when it discusses the candle lighting over there, also you see the Alter Rebbe says even though the takana of lighting candles in each room, Shlei Kashal, the Eitz of Evan, the Ikar takana of Adlakas Neilis is in the main room, which is the room where you eat, not in the rooms where you sleep. Yeah, but anyways, therefore, being that the Ikar place is, Ikar Dira Sa'adam is the place where he eats, and happens to be, we saw it in the previous Siman, that also Daitei Shel Adam is B'mokim Mizay Neisov. We saw that in Shin, a few Simanim ago, in the beginning, in Shin Samach Vav. So therefore, if everybody eats together in the same room on Shabbos, it's an important understanding to remember this diuk in Alter Rebbe. He says in Shabbos, even though each person brings his own food and he eats on his own table, still they don't, and each one has his own room where they sleep. they still don't need to make their own eruv, and they're not oyser, not oyser one another. And even if they have to make an eruv with a different chatzer, if with a different house in the same chatzer, still only one person from this group has to do it, because they're all considered like one group, one person. And even if they put up mechitzas between them while eating, for tznius purposes, people don't want to eat with other families, it's also not a problem. It still does not make a problem. The mere fact that they're eating all in the same room, even with mechitzas between them, on Shabbos, that already makes them all into one unit, and one unit that does not need an eruv. As opposed to, and over here, mechitzas haraya is not a problem, because it's the ikar of Dira Sa'adam is a place where they eat, as opposed to in a traklin where the mechitzas do make a difference, because over there we're talking about sleeping. Now, if you look, now in Seif Zayin, we could learn to discuss, just pointing it out in short, about people that have a house in their father's property, and they receive a certain allowance from the father for food, whether it's actual food, or they receive money for food, and they take it and they eat in their own houses, so they don't need to make an eruv between them, unless there's other diurim in the chotzer and they have to make an eruv with the father, and the eruv is kept in somebody else's house. But otherwise, it's not a problem. They don't need it. Why? Because they're considered, because since he is giving them food, they're considered b'nei beisay. The same thing applies to women. They receive a pras from ba'alein, they receive a certain amount from their husband. The same thing to avodim, and the same thing to students who receive a certain allowance for food from their teacher. That they're all considered as one b'nei beisay. So now, what happens if you have? So from this, if you look at bachrim living in a dormitory, or girls living in a dormitory in the yeshiva or in the seminary, the chayra, you have about 3 heterim why they don't need to make an eruv. First of all, they eat in the same room, dining room, and even if they don't eat in the same dining room, they receive, if in the olden days they would receive the yeshiva would arrange where they would eat, or give them way to buy food. And we know from the Alter Rebbe, the ikar dira sa'adam we just learned is mokim achilas apas, and therefore depends on where you eat on Shabbos. And the third reason is because in the yeshiva and the seminary is יכול לסלקו בכל שירצה. כידוע ומפורסם.
So they're even in their own rooms, they're moking a fia in the kitchen, the same kitchen that all prepared. Which by Talmidim is enough to...
By Talmidim is enough, yeah.
So that's another heter. Why? You have to go to their rooms.
Yeah, Matzil Sluk is the strongest heter. Now,
Can't come out on Shabbos.
No, don't underestimate people's capabilities.
How do you define a cloud?
Matzil Sluki means that if I give you a specific,
Legally,
also the Rebbe will deal with the letter from the Rebbe. The Rebbe looks in the legal aspect of it. Before legally, the fact I tell you could be here for 3 weeks, and I could pick up on the 3rd day and tell you get out of here, and you have no recourse against me.
it's like part of the contract.
It's not. It doesn't need the contracts. Whatever we made up, and I still could do it. A rental, even a rental which I could throw you out the middle. A regular rental, there's conditions in the contract. I can't throw you out. But otherwise, if I could throw you out, then that means that I never really gave you any real ownership on this. Now, based on this Alter Rebbe, it's interesting to see this, that some were medayik, if somebody eats a whole week in one house, but every Shabbos he goes to eat somewhere else. He eats by shver, by shviger, by his parents, or by his sibling. He goes out every Shabbos. Then he is not oyser if he's the one who is in the chotzer. If he's in the chotzer, he's not oyser on the other person. Why? Because Ikra Mokem Diras Adam is Mokem Achilosei, and Mokem Achilosei specifically is mashma that it's on Shabbos. Since on Shabbos he's never there, Mokem Achilosei, l'cha'ira he is not oyser. Now what happens if one Shabbos he doesn't eat there, and the rest of the Shabbosim he does eat, and punk that Shabbos there's a need to make an Eruv or whatever it is he oyser on that Shabbos or not, with the Shabbos that he's not there? So the B'tzei L'Chochmeh says that you follow each Shabbos is looked at independently, and the mere fact that on this Shabbos he did not eat over there is enough that on this Shabbos you don't have to, he's not oyser on everybody else. The Chazon Ish says that we go based on the Rov Shabbosis of the year, and soon we're going to see from the letter of the Rebbe we could be medayik like the B'tzei L'Chochmeh. Huh? Yeah. What? It's only the specific Shabbos, yeah. The question is, what happens if somebody eats every Shabbos and one Shabbos he's not there? What do we look at it or not? What do you mean?
Most times he goes, but it's sort of half-half, and so there's no specific way when he goes once in a while.
According to, that's the thing. According to the B'tzei L'Chochmeh, it would depend on this specific Shabbos. According to the Chazon Ish, it would not. It would depend on the majority of the Shabbos. You have to look at it. Now, in Siftes is talking about when a person, even if you have a reach, you have a guest in your chutzner and he has his own room, etc., and he sleeps in his own room and he eats in his own room. So as long as he's there less than 30 days, he's not oyser on the rest of the bnei chutzner, and everybody else in the chutzner is allowed to be metaltal over there, from their house to his house, and everybody becomes tafel to the Baal Bayis. And the Yeshem Alter Rebbe says that there is another opinion that he's not considered tafel to the Baal Bayis for if he rented the room, even less than 30 days. The only thing is that less than 30 days doesn't cause an isser to the other people in the chutzner. But it doesn't mean that he becomes tafel, that he himself does not have to make a Eruv Chatzeres. Why? Because here the Alter Rebbe introduces the concept Schirus liyoymoi memkerhu. A rental even for one day is considered a purchase, and therefore it's considered his. And if it has all the conditions that of a rental, which would be usher, then the fact that it's less than 30 days does not make it that does not make it mutter for somebody else is not matter for him. It's just that he does not become tafel a bottle to the Baal Bayis. It only means that he's not oyser on the Baal Bayis, but for he himself is still a problem. Over here the Alter Rebbe again says in Bמשאיל that that the same thing applies if he lends it to him for a certain amount of time and he can't get rid of him during that time. But after 30 days, then he is oyser on them only if he can't get rid of him during that time. That means, again, after 30 days, again, the concept is here again, that if you can't get rid of them, and יכול לסלקו. Now, the Alter Rebbe then tells you, even if from the beginning, he's already renting for more than 30 days. He's renting for his kiveya that he's going to rent for 32 days. He's still not oyser up until day 31. And even if he usually comes, every time he comes to visit, he comes for more than 30 days, we still don't say that he's oyser right away. The yesh omrim that if he comes on a regular basis, he is oyser right away, but Alter Rebbe says halacha kedivrei hameko. But this only applies if there is a steady owner to this chutzner, and not that you have a bunch of people together. That means if you have one owner who's living there the whole time, then guests who are less than 30 days are bottled to him. But if you have either bottled to him or not oyser on him. But if you have If it's just 6 people who rent it together, and each one of them rented for less than 30 days, that heter doesn't apply. Now this idea that you have to have, why? Because you have to have a balabas with it. Just to point out something I forgot to mention before, that when we're talking about this idea that you have to have a balabas who's in place, also when it comes to tfisas yad, if let's say there is apartments or there's rooms that are rented out, and the owner doesn't have a tfisas yad in each room, but one of the residents has a tfisas yad in each one of these places. He's there for longer than everybody else, so he doesn't have place in his house, so he left some garbage in one apartment, some garbage in another apartment. Since he's not the owner, it doesn't have the effect on it. There has to be a physical owner who creates this concept of oirchim, which are living which are tafel to him, or are not oyser on him, or his guests, or his bnei bayis. There has to be a metzius of an owner over there.
He has to own the place where he has to do this, or somebody said, whatever.
Either own it, or he rented it, and then he rents it out to other people, or he borrowed it, and he can't and his owner can't get rid of him. Some kind of permanent. When? Otherwise, what? Was besteht that he is? If he has tfisas yad, it's something else. But if he doesn't have tfisas yad, and he's only relying on the heter of 30 days, then how did they become his guests? There's a tshuva. The sefer Shalos tshuva is called Chemdas Moshe. To Rav Moshe Yaakov Beck. He was called the Av Bezdin of Apshe, a city in Czechoslovakia, and then he became the Rav of a shul called Chemdas Torah V'Chesed here in Crown Heights. Passed away like 40 years ago. He printed a book called Shalos Tshuvas Chemdas Moshe, and the first סימן that he has in his book, this book was printed Tafshin Yutes, he discusses 2 topics. Topic number 1, Jews living in buildings where there are mechalei Shabbos Yidden in the same building, and going to a hotel on Shabbos. And it's an interesting tshuva, very easy read. And over there he discusses, the first question is about Jews who are living in buildings in New York where there are Yidden who are not moide be'eruv. What does it mean not moide be'eruv? He says they're mechalei Shabbos befarhesia. So now they are oyser on the other people, and until you do schiras reshus from them, and they don't want to be masker reshus, they don't believe in it. So he says, he tries to find the tatum. It's a common issue. You have buildings where you have Yidden, and you have Yidden who are mechalei Shabbos over there, and you have other Yidden who are fruma Yidden. They want to be able to carry in the building, and what are you going to do? So he says, first of all, you could say that they have, if the owner of the building has his own things in the hallways, then he has tfisas yad in the hallway, so everybody could carry through the hallways. Huh?
If the owner is a guy, or
if he has tfisas yad and something which is permanent there, maybe the question if the owner is either guy is a different discussion. We'll get to it later. So he says, if there's something which it cannot be moved because it's heavy or because of tilt, then these Yidden who are mechalei Shabbos are not oyser the hallway for everybody else. That's an important point. Just remember, even though I'm not focusing on this so much. When a person, just because, if we define that this person is not oyser on somebody else, if he's not part of it, he's just not oyser the public areas, I still cannot carry into his house.
The owner of the building has to live in the building.
Huh?
Yeah, to work.
For half tfisas yad, no. For tfisas yad, no.
Part of that chutzner.
He has tfisas yad, he has things in the chutzner.
He's
Using it.
supposed to be a member of that chutzner. The whole point of this is that it makes it a part of his house. If his house doesn't even open up this lobby, this chutzner,
Right, then he has nothing, yeah.
he has to live in that building.
Or has an office in the building, something there, yeah. Eating in the building. Yeah, it's eating in the building, yeah.
A person owns tons of houses all over. He owns a lot of
Right,
buildings.
it's not.
It's not considered his house for Shabbos.
No, it's not.
part of that chutzner.
Right.
he has to eat in there on Shabbos.
Yeah. And then he says, now what happens if you don't have chaftzei of the chavatzim of the balabais in the hallway? Then he says, well, first of all, there's a heter maybe because there's other exits. Yes, you can say the Mechalei Shabbos are using the second door of the building, not the first door of the building. So this hallway to the doors of the building is only for the Yidden or Shemer Shabbos. Okay, we'll define it. The Mechalei Shabbos is going to go through the other door. And therefore, they're not oiser, like when there's two ways to exit. They're not oiser on the Mechalei Shabbos, not oiser on the Yidden. He says maybe the Mechalei Shabbos not really Mechalei Shabbos, Befarhesia, maybe not because they are Tinakis Shenishbu. Then he brings a svara. Maybe the fact that every apartment has a fire escape may also be considered. He brings up as a raya from a rishon. Maybe that's also considered that they have another exit. But he says that's not enough of a good reason. He relies mainly on the fact that if there's two doors to the building, then that's the best way that there shouldn't be oyster one another. Then he goes into the whole hotel thing.
Well, I understand. The whole building is connected to both doors. You can't say one hallway is connected to one door and one hallway is to a different door.
Right. What he says, since you could say that they're not oyster, they're going to walk out through that door, and I'm going to walk out through this door. So being that they have another way of walking out through those hallways, then their usage is not oyster those hallways for everybody else. That was a svara that he brings over there. And then he moves into the whole topic of a hotel. Starts from Ois Yud Aleph in his Shuvah, it's little paragraphs. Ois Yud Aleph in his Shuvah, he goes into the whole hotels. He says you have a Jewish owner of a hotel, and you have a Jewish, this book of Shuvah is in Hebrew books, you could look at it afterwards. There's a Jewish owner to the hotel, there's a Jewish, and the people, and some of the people eating in the hotel are Yidden, and each one eats in his own room. There's also Goyim in the hotel, there's also Yidden or Mechalei Shabbos in the hotel. So first he brings a svara, he says if the owner of the hotel has a right to relocate you from one room to another room in the middle of your stay, then l'cha'ira, your room is not considered a Reshus HaMiyuchedes, and therefore that might be a svara why you are considered a guest of the Baal Bayis, and it's not your Reshus, and therefore one person is not oyster on the other person when it comes to a hotel. But he says that's not enough of a reason. Why? Because the concept of Yachol Lessalko doesn't mean you just move them from one room to another during the term of their time. It means that you throw them out completely out of the hotel. But if you could just move them from one room to another, it doesn't mean that you threw them out of your property. If you didn't throw them out of your property, they still have some ownership over there, so that heter doesn't work. So he says, the only heter that would work is if they all eat together in the same room, and otherwise you should make Erev Chatzeres without a bracha. And then he goes and continues, he says, okay, and then Ois Yud Gimel, he says, well, maybe the Shulchan Aruch discusses that you have the idea of 30 days. Up to 30 days is not a problem. And in hotels, it shouldn't be an issue. Why? Because in hotels, all the people stay less than 30 days. So he says, no. He says, in every hotel, you're going to find somebody who's there for more than 30 days.
Also, everyone's a guest over there.
Huh?
The whole thing of 30 days is when there's someone who's darsh on the kviyas. There's no kviyas in a hotel. Everyone's a guest there.
So he says, more than 30 days becomes kviyas. And therefore, they're oyser. And then he goes and says there's another heter, which he sees that may be because even though the Baal Bayis doesn't have things in each of the rooms, but he has the reshus to put things. He has the right to put things in each of the rooms. So he says that also doesn't help. Why doesn't it help if he has the reshus to put in each thing? Because you have to actually have chafatzim in each of the room, and not just that you have a right to do it. And it only applies if the thing that the Baal Bayis has there, the seicher has no right to take it out. But if the seicher has a right to deal with it, then it still doesn't help as tfisas yad of the Baal Bayis. So he says all the heterim you can think of don't work for a hotel. And he brings from the smak that's mentioned in the Bes Yosef that if you have a suffix when it comes to Erev Chatzeres, if there's tfisas yad, there's no tfisas, you should make an Erev without a bracha, and therefore you should make an Erev without a bracha. Then he says some Talmid Chacham came over to him and told him that being that the Baal Bayis of the hotel has tables and chairs and an oven, so it's in each room, so it's considered that he has a tfisas yad, and he says that completely doesn't help. He says it's a mistake. that people think. He says tfisas yad is only when the purpose of this thing in the person's room, the room is the balabais using it or wanting it there. But not if this is also rented out to the person. The fact is, when you rent out the hotel room, he has a right to use the table, and he has a right to use the beds, and he has a right to use the fridge, and he has a right to use the coffee machine, and he has a right to use the oven. That's why he rents out the room. It's not something which is there, yours, that he doesn't have a right to do it. So therefore, he says that you have to make an Erev Chatzeres if it's a Jewish-owned hotel between the rooms, and if it's a Goyish-owned hotel, you need to do Schiras Rishus. He sent this book to the Rebbe.
Okay, but if they all eat in the same room, then it's not a problem.
That's not a problem, no.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Because then they all become Erchim of the Balbais.
The Balai doesn't live there. He has to live there, be eating there on Shabbos.
They're relying,
How come he doesn't mention at all anything about the Balabais living there and eating there on Shabbos? If he's not, just because he owns the hotel, he's not...
No, but all the people eating together, they all become like one family. It's nothing to do with the Balabais. Eating together is separate. Eating together is the fact that everybody's eating in the same room. It's as if all their foods got mixed together. It goes back to before. This is the Eruv.
And the fact that there's going there?
That's you have to deal with. That's a different. Maybe they're in this battle. I don't know.
Okay, even if all the Yidden eat in the same room, like let's say they're renting it out for a bar mitzvah or something, there's still, if there's goyim there, they have to, it's a problem. Like, right, if it's a bunch of urchim and there's a nachri there, they have to rent the shus.
After the Schiras Rishus, if it's goyim after the Schiras Rishus, yeah.
So if there's goyim in the hotel, nothing helps. You're always going to
The
have...
Schiras Rishus you could do Schiras Rishus from the owner of the hotel. For the hallways, you don't need the goyim's rooms.
For the hallways.
For the hallways, all you need is the hallways. You don't need to go into the goyim's rooms.
But I'm saying, in the case of the goyim in the hotel, even if they eat in the same room, doesn't help.
If the goyim eat in the same room,
No, even if all the
Yidden
eat in the
eat
same
in
room,
the-
but
yeah.
in the hotel, you need to do
unless
something
from the owner of the hotel, yeah. Now he sent this book to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe responded to him with a letter. It's printed in Igris. You say this is the letter. It's Chelik Yutches, and it's Yemei Haslichas Tavshin Yutes. So Igris Chelik Yutches, and the number of the letter is Zayin Chavav. Well, the Rebbe thanks him for the book, and the Rebbe gives a few comments on the Akdama. The Rebbe discusses one, says, I'm going to give you some ha'aras in the book. The Rebbe discusses Shas Tshuva Siman Aleph, which is the one we just discussed, the first one. And he does not discuss the first half about living in buildings, but the second half about hotels. And the Rebbe starts by saying in this letter, Frume Yidden are making hotels. The Frierdiker Rebbe was machmer, not to carry in the hallways of the hotels. That's the Frierdiker Rebbe, but the Frume Yidden are noyek to be making hotels, and it gives 4 reasons. Number 1, the owner of the hotel has things that belong to him in each of the rooms. And that shows, now then the Rebbe quotes the Lashon Alter Rebbe in Seif Beis, that he did not remove himself completely from these houses, and they all become ka'orchim etzli, of the owner. More so, you cannot compare it to renting a house. He says there are more restrictions on renting in a hotel room. There's more conditions for your rental. It's not that you get the whole thing for yourself, the whole room for yourself without any restrictions. There are more restrictions by renting in a hotel than renting your own apartment. Yeah, that's the first reason. So that's the first reason that he points out. He disagrees with the one who wrote the Sefer, the Chemdas Moshe. The Chemdas Moshe wanted to say that the whole idea of Kalim is a din in ishtamshus. If the owner could go in there and use it, then if the owner can't go in there and use it and lets the other person use it, and he himself doesn't use it anymore, then it's no longer considered tfisas yad. The Rebbe says, no, the idea of kalim is not about whether the person is actually going to go in and use it. It's the idea of siluk. Did he remove himself completely from this house, or he didn't remove himself completely from this house or not? The Rebbe looks at the kalim. The idea of tfisas yad and kalim is that a person remove himself completely from any call it ownership of this room while he rented out the room or not. The second reason he says,
Why isn't the fact that it's not limited to Schiras bias?
he points out as a side point, he says it's not the same, there are more restrictions and he's going to go through them. The Rebbe is going to go through these different differences between, it's not a full schilus. A person rents a hotel room, it's not a full schilus like renting a house.
It's not like he has so much to the opinion.
That means he still remains somewhat of a ireach. The second point, he says, even if it would be schilus mamish, every room has things in there that belong to the owner that the soicher doesn't use at all. Every hotel room has certain things that belong to the owner that remain there, that were not put there for the purpose of the soicher to use. I don't know what specific that's referring to in today's age.
Washing stuff.
Huh?
I'm saying like soap, shampoo, not shampoo.
No.
To wash the floor, whatever.
No, they don't keep it in the hotel room. He says, even if it's full schilus. The third reason is, the third reason, the Rebbe says, that according to Pri Megadim and the Oil Shabbos and Tosfos Shabbos, as opposed to the Mishnah Brura, it's enough if the Baal Bayis has reshus to put stuff there, and not if he actually has kalim in the room. Just the mere fact that he has reshus to put things there is that. The fourth thing is, because people live there for less than 30 days. And then the Rebbe comes and says, and even the people who live there more than 30 days, they pay their rent weekly, every week, or whatever it is, a certain amount of time that the hotel charges you. The hotel charges you every day. The hotel's not going to keep a person in the hotel for 6 months or for 40 days without charging them even once. They have to get paid. So once a week they'll charge it. That means that at the end of each week, so to speak, at the end of each short time, the Baal Bayis has a right to throw him out. Why? Because there is no contract there is no legal contract which forces the owner of this is the Rebbe says, this is ein choize, or the loikes chirus batim. The owner doesn't have with you a contract that mandates that he has to keep you there. There's an understanding, I understand it. As opposed to a house where there is legal contract that you can't throw a person out in the middle. You can't evict somebody. In a hotel, you don't have that. At the end of the time, you could throw him out. Maybe you could throw him out even before the end of the time. So if it's 30 days, less than 30 days, you charge them every day. And he says, that means that every week, the Rebbe explains, every week it renews itself. Every time you get charged a credit card or the check gets charged again, it's a new schirus. So even though it's 4 weeks of consecutive, or 5 weeks consecutive, it's not 30 days. Because at the end of every week, you get thrown out. The contract, your term expires. And even if he does pay monthly in the hotel, let's say it's more of a long-term hotel, and he's there for more than a month, he says the only time this person would be Oyser is on the 31st day. If it's a Goyish, a month which has 31 days, then on the 31st day you'd be Oyser. That day you'd be Oyser. Why? Because the first 30 days you're not Oyser. The 31st day, the Alter Rebbe only says you're Oyser only on day number 31. So because you renew your schiros at the beginning of the first of each month, which means the whole term begins at the first of each month, which means that you could get thrown out at the end of the month. So the only way it's going to be oyser, a person who's there for more than 30 days, is if there's a month of 31 days and the 31st day falls on Shabbos.
No, the last hectare could apply to every apartment.
No, you can't throw somebody out. So apartments, short-term rentals, yeah. Short-term rentals, yeah. Long-term rentals, no. Nobody gives the fact that you pay rent once a month, your contract is for 12 months, you can't get evicted. The contract is for 12 months. If you have a short-term rental, something else. If you have a contract for 12 months, it's not so. And l'chayra, that would apply to also short-term rentals of apartments b'chlal also, the same idea. That if you pay once a month, and it's not, you don't have a long-term, a contract, and legally you get thrown out in the middle, then it's you don't need to do, then you're not oyster one another.
This is all when the hotel is owned by a yid.
All when the hotel is owned by a yid. This was the answer, yeah. Now, the Rebbe doesn't discuss whether the hotel is owned by a yid or the hotel is owned by a goy.
The whole discussion of the letter is when the hotel is owned by a yid.
That's what, the Rebbe doesn't mention it, but that's a response to the Chenas Moshe.
How does it own by a guy? You still have to experience the truth.
Now, so if you have if it's owned by a goy or by Yidus Mechal Shabbos, so happens to be the Yad Ephraim and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, they hold that Orchim could apply even if the owner is a goy or the owner is a Yidus Mechal Shabbos, the din of Orchim still applies to them. You could be a Reach of Yidus Mechal Shabbos, the owner is Mechal Shabbos, you could be a Reach of a goy. But from the Mashmos Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Brura, it seems that it's not so. But it only applies when it's a yid. When it's a goy, you have to do schiras rishus. Now, the reason why I would venture to say that the Rebbe is going to be mekel even when the hotel is owned by a goy is because the fact is that most of the hotels that we were discussing that the Frierdiker Rebbe was in or whatever it is, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't carry, but he says that most Yidden are in hotels. A lot of the hotels that the Rebbeim went to in Europe were owned by Goy. The hotels in America where Yidden went to, were owned by Yidden. Or at least Mechal Shabbos, some of them were Mechal Shabbos. The hotels that the Frierdiker Rebbe went to in Eretz Yisrael were also owned by Yidden. But in Europe, when they went to Paris or these places, the hotels not owned by Yidden, they were owned by Goy.
They carried?
The Frierdiker Rebbe didn't carry, the Rebbe said the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't carry. But Fruma Yidden carries, the Rebbe says. Fruma Yidden carrying hotels, the Frierdiker Rebbe did not carry. Now, the Meinaf Kamina, you have bungalows where one person owns the whole bungalow colony and he rents it out to people for weekly or monthly. Not talking about where everybody owns their own bungalows. When you go to a hotel room, when you go to Airbnb. Now, when hotels, if everybody eats together in the same room, there's a heter, right? They eat Sudas Shabbos, the whole discussion if you have to eat actual Sudas Shabbos or just eat together in the room. But let's discuss if you eat together in a room. Not every hotel, but most hotels today, many hotels today, have breakfast every morning. You go, it's part of the package you get. You go downstairs and everybody eats breakfast together. Now, the Yidden, they don't eat breakfast by the Goyim, but there's fruits. They're going to go downstairs and look, there's going to be fruit, they take a coffee, whatever it is that you could do over there. So ultimately, you do have everybody eating together on the balbais, and they are cooking for you.
No, but that's in air. It's not in eating in the same place. Because eating in the same place has to be bread, no? It has to be on the
Suda. But here I'm saying is in the hotel you have another element that you're all urchim of the owner, by the mere fact that the food is provided to you, whether you eat it or you don't eat it, you're not getting a discount. It's not being charged to your hotel room. The fact is that you go to a hotel, most of the hotels there's breakfast, free breakfast. That you get you go downstairs and people eat together, or they eat from the same food. So that might be a heter. Now when everybody eats together, so if you look in the Aruch HaShulchan and Sif Yud Zayin, he points out that obviously it has to be the main Seudas Shabbos has to be eaten together if you want to use that everybody becomes one group, not the Orchim on the deal of the Baal Bayis' bill, but if everybody's eating together becomes one, that refers to the eats of the Shabbos together. The Chaya Adam says that there have to be some chudaitim on that some chudaitim on this from Erev Shabbos on the eating together, because that way then it becomes like an Erev. Now in the other place where this would apply to is in hospitals. People are in hospitals on Shabbos, and some people might have the mistaken idea that you can't carry in the hallways. And says no, everybody in the hospital is a guest of the hospital. They're not charging you for your room only. They're charging you for the medical care. And they're giving you a room so they could treat you medical care. They're also giving you food. So everybody's essentially guests of the hospital. So the fact that somebody's sick, he doesn't have to worry about it. Somebody's a chayla. But the people who are not chaylim, who are helping the chaylim or helping themselves, they have not a problem. That's not an issue to carry over there. B'chlal in the hotel, in the hospital, even less in the hotel. Your room is not your room. You can get moved from there. You're only there for the purpose of you're there because the hospital is giving you. You're paying for the treatment, and everybody's eating together. Now, obviously, when you're in a camp, you can also go in camps. Everybody eats together in the same room. The only question which I have, and with that I'm going to conclude, if you have a bungalow colony, you have 40, 50, 60 units, and each one owns their own, not that's rented by one person, rents everybody by weekly because that's much easier. If each person owns their own bungalow, and they have a whole bungalow colony together. Every Shabbos, all the men eat their ikar meal in shul. I don't know, is that considered that you don't need Erev Chatzeres or not? Huh? They don't wash at home either. The Kiddush, and they eat the full meal. Medina, the amount of crackers that they eat, they have to make a Maitzion. The Kuli Alma. There's Kaveh Suda and wine. Make Kiddush, and then they make Kiddush and Mashke, and then they eat Mazonis crackers, so you have, so there's no Kaveh Suda. They're all eating together. The Suda Shabbos. Okay, so that's, maybe some places do wash. I'm saying the amount of crackers they eat is pas. Is it? I don't know. I'll leave you with that question because I don't have an answer, huh?
Probably all of Erev regardless.
They have Erev regardless. I'm asking, what happens if they didn't make an Erev? Could they rely on the Kiddush? If they forgot to make Erev Chatzeres one year?
Once they're so drunk with the Kiddush, they'll carry.
I'm saying, could they rely on the fact that Shabbos Kiddush is everybody's eating together in shul? I don't know.
If one person doesn't stay, then his house stays for everyone else.
You have to make sure everybody stays. Don't let anybody out. Fine, there'll be